On February 27, 2026 in Los Angeles, Neil Sedaka passed away at the age of 86. His family shared the news briefly. A few hours later the songs that had once hit #1 on Billboard were playing again on radio and on music apps everywhere. Playlists brought his name back. The music kept on going. That pause closed a working rhythm that had lasted more than 50 years. From a small apartment in Brooklyn with an old upright piano to the tiny songwriting rooms of the Brill Building, and then to recording studios where tape reels spun steadily under bright white lights. At times his name sat right at the top of the charts. At times melodies he created traveled through the airwaves in someone else's voice while his own name faded into the background. At times the music market changed direction, and his sound had to find a way around entire continents. What lasted did not live in the numbers. It lived in the bones of songs sturdy enough to pass through decade after decade, flexible enough to be sung again by other voices, and familiar enough that with just the first few chords, listeners already knew exactly what they were hearing. And in that moment the long journey of Neil Sedaka did not need to be explained all over again. It was already living inside the melody itself. But to understand why someone could go through so many highs and lows without losing his own rhythm, you have to go back to where everything first started, before there were recording studios, before there were charts, before there was applause. Neil Sedaka was born on March 13, 1939 in Brooklyn, New York, and grew up in Brighton Beach in a working-class Jewish family. His father, Maury Mac Sedaka, drove a taxi to take care of the family. His mother, Eleanor, believed deeply that if her son had musical talent, that talent had to be trained properly and completely. Sedaka's childhood played out in a small apartment where the sounds of traffic outside never fully went away. In the middle of all that noise, the piano slowly took center stage in the home. When his elementary school teacher noticed the boy's natural ear for music and told the family to get him formal piano lessons, Eleanor worked extra months to buy a used upright piano. Sedaka sat at the keyboard every single day. His small fingers searched for the right keys and the right tempo. He learned to play a passage over and over until it came out exactly right. In 1947, at just 8 years old, he won a scholarship to the beginning program at Juilliard. Saturdays were not for playing out in the street but for classrooms lit by bright white lights with a metronome ticking steadily on the piano. He read each line of music, carefully stopping at even the smallest wrong note and repeating it until the passage moved forward without any stumbling. That kind of precision came from such repeated practice, week after week. Meanwhile, his mother continued looking toward the classical music path, a stable and respected route that society recognized. But the radio began slipping into the small apartment in Brighton Beach. Between classical pieces, short and direct pop melodies floated out of the speaker sitting near the window. He still went to class and still moved through his practice sessions like before. But in his head, his own little melody fragments began to appear, shorter and easy enough to sing back after just one listen. At 13, an important friendship formed. Neighbor heard him playing and introduced him to Howard Greenfield, who was 16 at the time and looking for someone to put music to his lyrics. They sat side by side in a small cramped room, with scratch paper spread all across the piano. At first they wrote songs that had a theatrical feel. When rock and roll showed up and tastes changed, they rewrote everything. Lyrics were crossed out, choruses got shorter, and rhythms were tightened to fit broadcast time. No big declarations were made. There were only drafts torn up and replaced with better ones. The Brill Building was a collection of small rooms pressed close together, where doors were constantly opening and closing. People carrying demos walked through narrow hallways, and the sound of one piano spilled right into the next room over. Some days they would write a verse, record a demo on tape, rewind to listen to it, then cross the whole thing out immediately if it was not catchy enough. In that building, a song did not wait around for inspiration. It got finished like a regular work shift. During his years at Abraham Lincoln High School, Sedaka finished his regular studies while continuing to write music with Greenfield. In 1956, he graduated at 17. Two very clear paths stood in front of him. He did not walk away from the foundation he had already built. He carried it right into another space. When he walked into his first recording studios in the years that followed, he was not starting from scratch. He was simply changing the location he was working in. He made no attention-grabbing declaration. He did not try to break anything down. Brooklyn, Juilliard, the Brill Building. Three very different spaces that gradually merged into one consistent way of doing things. When he stepped into professional studios in the years that followed, Sedaka did not begin from zero. He brought with him the precision that had become second nature, the rhythm that had been trained into him, and the structure that had already been tested. From that quiet starting point he entered the world of popular music, not loudly, but firmly enough to go a very long way. In 1957, Sedaka officially joined the profession. He joined the doo-wop group, the Link Tones, which later became the Tokens. For a short time it was an environment where voices blended together, where song structures had to be tight, and the rhythm solid enough to keep the entire group moving together. Sedaka did not stay long. He left the group and chose to go solo, carrying with him his piano and the songs he had written with Howard Greenfield. And his first solo recordings were released in a market that was changing fast. The first three singles did not become hits. They did not open a big door and did not immediately put him at the center of the charts, but they put him in front of a completely different reality. Standing alone at the microphone was not the same as harmonizing inside a group. He had to hold the rhythm all by himself, create his own emphasis, and take full responsibility for every line he sang. Those early recording sessions became places where he figured out how he placed his voice and how he brought melodies written on paper into the space of the studio. At the same time, Sedaka began showing up on television, including American Bandstand. The camera lens required him to learn a whole new skill, staying focused under hot lights and in front of a live audience. There was no group behind him to share the pressure. Every time he stepped onto that stage was a moment of standing completely on his own. Those early appearances were not connected to a major hit, but they got him comfortable with the working rhythm of the entertainment industry. From studio to soundstage, from demo to radio airplay, these years did not produce a clear peak. They unfolded quietly in studios, on television stages, among demos that had not yet found their place. Sedaka kept writing and kept sitting down with Greenfield, tweaking each melodic line until it stood firmly on the page. He did not change his working method just because the market was shifting. The first singles did not create a turning point, but they did not stop him either. He went back to the piano and started a new piece, then another, and within that chain of experiments a melody strong enough began to take shape, a melody that would carry his name out of the preparation stage and into the very center of the charts. And in 1958 a song called The Diary began to move everything out of that small studio and onto nationwide radio airwaves. The Diary was not loud. It was not born from some big promotional campaign. It came from a very personal moment when Sedaka wanted to read Connie Francis's diary, and she said no. He did not argue. He went back to the piano. The melody grew out of the feeling of being kept outside someone's private world. The song was released, climbed the Billboard Hot 100, and landed at number 14. More records were pressed. Radio appearances became more frequent. RCA Victor kept the name Neil Sedaka on its list of artists to keep investing in. From that point the working rhythm changed completely. In 1959, Carole was born under some pretty personal circumstances. Sedaka named the song after Carole King, a former classmate at Brooklyn College, and someone he had dated when they were both very young and just beginning to step into the professional songwriting world. In the Brill Building environment at that time, where young songwriters ran into each other every day between writing rooms and narrow hallways, the personal relationships and music naturally got tangled together in that way. Carole was built with a tight structure, a short introduction and a chorus that showed up early and repeated enough times to get stuck in the listener's ear. The melody was bright and easy to sing along with, and the rhythm was clean and clear. When the record was released, the song quickly spread beyond the American market, reaching Italy, Japan, and England. Orders went up. Sedaka's touring schedule got busier and his name started being known in countries that did not even speak English. Carole King later responded with a song called O'Neill. This recording came out as a direct reply, almost like a musical back and forth between two young writers who had known each other personally. However, O'Neill did not get anywhere near the same commercial success. Meanwhile, Carole kept being played on the radio, got pressed multiple times, and appeared on television programs. The story would later be remembered by the press as an early musical exchange between two young people who would both become major figures in the world of songwriting. Not a public competition, but a moment when personal life and professional work met inside the same song. By 1960, recordings were leaving the studio one after another. Stairway to Heaven, You Mean Everything to Me, and Run Samson Run were released one after another. Sedaka moved between studio and soundstage, morning recording sessions and afternoon reviewing arrangements, and evening television appearances. American Bandstand was no longer a place for experimenting. He walked into the studio, stood at the piano, finished the performance, and left when the lights went off. In 1961, the pace did not slow down one bit. Calendar Girl, Little Devil, and Happy Birthday Sweet 16 all came out one right after another, almost with no gap in between releases. Calendar Girl was produced in a special visual format along with The Dreamer, and later Breaking Up is hard to do. The camera stayed fixed in place and the light shone directly onto his face. Each filming required keeping the same smile and the same rhythmic precision, even as the work schedule stretched from studio to soundstage through singles, television, and clips. The release channels were no longer separate. They all operated at the same time, demanding that he stay constantly present. In 1962, Breaking Up is Hard to Do climbed to number 1 on Billboard. The success was clear, but the schedule did not ease up. The studio stayed exactly the same. Microphones set up, sheet music on the stand, and magnetic tape spinning steadily. Outside the door, phone calls from the record label and television programs waited to lock in dates. Next Door to an Angel continued up the charts. Singles were released one close behind another. One song had just finished its orchestration, and another was already scheduled for recording. RCA Victor prepared record covers, sent press copies to radio stations, and set up photo sessions. Sedaka still sat at the piano, adjusting each chord, trying the chorus again until it stood firmly. while the pace outside did not let up. Alongside his role as a singer he kept on writing. He and Greenfield gave Connie Francis songs like Stupid Cupid and Theme from Where the Boys Are. He wrote songs for Jimmy Clanton that came out during the same period. In other sessions he played piano on Dream Lover for Bobby Darin. At times, his name appeared on the record cover. At times it did not. But each day still started with sheet music placed in front of him and ended when the work was done. From 1958 to 1962, recordings left the studio continuously. Singles were released, clips were filmed, and television programs were scheduled. Sedaka moved according to that schedule, carrying with him sheet music already prepared. The machine operated and he kept on sitting down at the piano whenever a new song needed to be completed. That rhythm gradually became completely familiar.